I hope all you lovely people had a nice snack break there. And, now our bully bellies are full. We can continue on and wrap up this module on the nature and ambiguity of rights. Emphasis, I guess, on the ambiguity, because the last video, raised a few questions there about what's involved when you claim to have a right to something. A lot of questions need to be answered, lots of debates because of that. And so I'd like to use this video to ask more questions. Oh my gosh, it never ends. I know. I told you, this is going to be a roller coaster. Just question. You're going to be left like, holy cow, I don't know. And it's tough. But I'll have some more positive words at the end of this video. But still got it, that'll be the end of the roller coaster ride. So 6 more questions. Oh my gosh, 6 more questions. Things get fun. I love all these questions because they just get crazy. This is where the roller coaster keeps going. Question number 1, can you waive a right? Can you waive a right? By that, I mean, may X voluntarily give up their right to Y? May X voluntarily consent to giving up their right to Y? And so again, this is, as I said, giving up a right, waiving a right is usually thought to be done through consent. Because look, I assume we agree, you have a right to not be harmed. I hope we can agree on that. You have that. But look, hey, if you happen to be a boxer, you then consent to allow the person you're boxing, the other person, to punch you, to harm you. That's what boxing is, right? And so we see boxers waive their right to be harmed. And maybe football players, also very physical, dangerous sport, maybe they consent and waive their rights as well. But already you might be thinking, do they? Some controversy already there. Things that look just puzzles within puzzles. But similarly, I assume that you believe that you have, and let's say you have a right to privacy. However, when you go into a hospital, you quickly consent to allow your doctor to see you naked or to, know other things about you. And so patients, to the very, actual patients in a hospital, of course, you sign that paperwork that waives all sorts of your rights. But again, you've consented to that. You have agreed to that because, of course, that's necessary for the doctor to be able to help you, is to lose some parts. You don't have to give up all your privacy, but you will waive some of your right to privacy. Certainly things that I or other, non-doctors outside of the hospital, I have no right to any of that stuff. All right, so that's question 1. Question 2, may you forfeit a right? Now, when we talk about forfeiting a right, the idea is may X involuntarily give up their right to Y. Again, involuntarily give up a right. Because with waiving a right, that's when you voluntarily give it up for, you consent to give it up. But when it comes to forfeiting a right, you lose that right whether or not we don't care what you say. You might lose that right no matter what. Now, the forfeiting of a right, the most common kind of thing we can think of when a person just involuntarily gives up a right is when a person does something immoral, when a person does something wrong. For example, you have your right to life and liberty. I think we all agree to that. But if you commit a crime, you're probably going to forfeit your right potentially to life and liberty, because look, you're going to get locked in prison probably. That's forfeiting your liberty. And if your crime is particularly bad, you might be executed, and so you've forfeited your right to life even. Lots of debates about that, if that's just or not, but at least the concept shouldn't be too surprising of forfeiting rights. Furthermore, Professor Gray, I have a right to not be harmed. I hope that makes sense. But if I attack you, it seems that I, Professor Gray, have forfeited my right, because you have your own right to self-defense, right? And your right to self-defense is going to, allow you to overrule my right, or I've forfeited it, whatever. But now your right to self-defense allows you to harm me. And we've now just raised the third question. May your rights overrule the rights of another? In other words, how or when can one person's right, like your right to self-defense, overrule another person's right, like my right to not be harmed? And the example we saw there, if I attack you, it seems I've forfeited my right, and so your right to self-defense wins, and you can fight and hurt me. But now suppose a different scenario. This example, everyone uses this example. Suppose Professor Gray is now strapped to the front of a tank. I didn't want to be there, but the army has duct taped me to this tank, and I'm stuck here like, help. and that tank, is trying to run you over, trying to hurt you. And I'm just like, I don't want this. I never asked for this. And you're like, well, this tank is coming to kill you. Does your right to self-defense allow you to harm me, to protect yourself from this tank? And so you might say, so does your right, because now I'm not the aggressor. I'm just the human shield. And so does your right to self-defense overrule my right to not being harmed? Because I'm innocent now. I'm just stuck here strapped to a tank. And then we might even ask, okay, suppose you can attack me, because it's your right to self-defense. Well, then do I have a right to self-defense and I can fight back? I mean, this image is just hilarious of you being chased by a tank and I'm on the tank like, and then you're like, screw it, I'm killing you, Professor Gray, you're not helping. And then I'm like, I got to fight back then. And I'm strapped to this tank. And so we get all sorts of funny little puzzles and I have a headache. Anyway, question number 4. Do you have any inalienable rights? Now, by an inalienable right, that means that X has a right to Y that can never be given up. An inalienable right is one that you cannot waive and it cannot be forfeited. You have this right always, always. You can't give it up and it can't be taken away from you. So it's not like the other two. And so, for instance, the thought might be that no matter what, that no one could ever say consent to being a slave to another person. That is, no matter what, you cannot be the property of another person, period. The right against slavery is often thought to be inalienable. No one is the property of another, period. It can't be. Your right to not be enslaved is a right that cannot be waived and it cannot be forfeited. Interesting. I think it might make sense. And even criminals, right? We say criminals forfeit their rights to all sorts of things, especially their freedom. At the very least, I think everyone's going to agree that criminals might need to spend, dangerous criminals will have to be locked up. Their freedom will be forfeited. But even then, we might think criminals, too, have certain inalienable rights. For instance, they might have a right to a fair trial. No matter how bad the criminal is, they always have a right to a fair trial. Or no matter how bad the criminal is, they have a right against cruel and degrading treatment. And so, again, the right to a fair trial, the right against cruel and unusual punishment, these might be thought to be inalienable rights that no one can forfeit. Even criminals get to keep those rights. Some people might debate that, though, but it's a debate, though, now. It's a question. It's not, inalienable rights. What are they? Why do we have them? Cool. Question 5. Who is responsible for enforcing your rights? If you have a right to property, for instance, who is responsible for actually ensuring that no one steals it from you? I think we'd all say that's easy. That's the police. But what if the police are unable to help? This is a lot of historical questions about this. What if the police are unable or unwilling to go after the criminals? Does that mean that then you can go vigilante style? You can be like the Batman and fight crime by yourself? And we've talked about vigilante justice is kind of scary because it can really, harm the wrong people or have way worse punishments than are deserved. And so, so can we go vigilante, or is that only the police that can do that? Or maybe maybe all rights are just up to you to protect for yourself. You have rights, sure, but those are on you to protect yourself with, and no one else has any obligation. Or maybe there are others, but other limits to how they can enforce it. I mean, if someone steals from you, can the police execute the person on site? Quick justice that way. Or does there need to be a trial first? I mean, lots of questions here about, again, who's enforcing it? Whose job is it to make sure your rights are protected? And what are the limits to what they can do about that? And if they don't do it, well, then now what? And so on and on. And the question of law enforcement, rights enforcement raises so many puzzles. It's really mind-blowing. I'll just throw them out there, much like Shelley Kagan. He just throws them out there and wow, we're on the bumpy part of the roller coaster now. Finally, question number 6. This is a cool one. Can rights create options for you? Now, so far, we've been kind of presuming that rights primarily act as constraints on how others may treat you. That is, you have a right to something, and that creates constraints or limits on how others may treat you. But we might ask, instead of creating constraints on others, is it possible that rights can create options for you? You have a right. Can a right create an option for you? Now, what do I mean by an option? Well, options are the exact opposite of constraints. Recall, constraints limit you. Constraints reduce the options that you may choose from. Excuse me. But options do the opposite. Again, constraints reduce, limit you. Options do the opposite. Options increase your choices. Options give you new options. That's not just a clever name. Options are options. They increase your choices. They allow you to do other things. For instance, let's go back to our old friend, Peter Singer. He's still hiding in my closet, I think. Is he? Actually, I haven't heard from him in a while. I wonder if it's kind of smelling back there. Do you think? Let's not think about that. What was I saying? Sorry, the fumes, the death fumes, I'm guessing. Remember, Peter Singer said that paying to see a movie is a luxury. And because it's a luxury, you know what he thinks you should do with that money. Yes, donate it to those in extreme poverty. And you might respond, yo, Professor Singer, I have a right to go to the movies. And notice what you've done there, because Singer is trying to restrict your options, tell you this is what you got to do, donate that money to the poor. But you might say you have a right to go to the movies. And notice that right has created an option for you. It's created something new that you are allowed to do, which is to go see the movie. So that's kind of cool how a right creates things for you. Your right to go see a movie. Singer wants you to spend it on the poor. No, you have a right to see that movie. Sorry, Singer, I have options. And similarly, Peter Singer wants you all to be vegetarian. Remember that. Again, because he wants you to consider the suffering of the animals, and the animals' suffering isn't worth you having bacon for breakfast. But then you might respond, yo, Peter Singer, I have a right to eat bacon, yo. Once again, though, you're saying you have a right to an option, a right that gives you something that you are free to choose if you want, if you choose it. So if you want bacon, you're saying I have a right to bacon, I can eat it. If I want to be a vegetarian, that's cool too, but I have the option. And so we're starting to see that it's, options mean there's things you can do that's not morally wrong for you to do. Go to the movies, eat bacon. And you might think you have a right to those things. So that's, Professor Singer is sad now, wherever he is, in heaven maybe now. Anyhow, these are all these 6 questions, very important questions to ask about rights. And as you can imagine, for each one of these, people debate these things all over the place. I've already hinted a bit at that here about what's waivable, inalienable, can rights create options? Are they just going to be constraints on others? Whatever it is. And so what we've seen, though, now in these past couple of videos is when you say you have a right to something, it might not be completely obvious to others what you mean about that. You will have to be able, if you have a right to something, you need to explain these things, because otherwise we really might not know what you mean when you say you have a right to something. And that's why when that poor student at the beginning of class, way back at the beginning of the semester says, I have a right to something, and I ask them, yeah, that's because I've just told you, spent a long time just talking in these videos about all the possibilities there of what it means to say you have a right to something. And so because of all this is why Shelley Kagan ends his article, just by saying that talks of rights is so horrendously ambiguous, because there's just all these questions, and people can mean very different things when they are talking about rights, which then is what's making these rights so darn confusing. And so as I mentioned, finally, at the beginning of this module, when it comes to rights, we may have way more questions than answers, because few people agree on rights and what rights involve. And now I think you might be seeing why that is, why it's so confusing, because there are so many different ways in which rights may be specified or how rights may be interpreted. Now, the more positive thing I want to say here at the end is that as you think about your own views about ethics and morality, it is wise to reflect on, what is the goodness of outcomes? What might that mean? And are there going to be constraints on promoting that goodness of outcomes? And if there are constraints, what might those constraints look like? Notice I'm just saying, just go back to what we've been talking about in this class. What is the goodness of outcomes? Is it just for you? Is it for others? And are there going to be limits or constraints on what you can do in the production when you produce the goodness of outcomes? Just reflecting again, these basic ideas about the goodness of outcomes, about constraints. If you do that first, if you really think through the way that we've been doing it, in the previous modules, I think if you do that, then you can come to these questions about rights and really start to flesh out answers to them. Because and Kagan kind of alludes to this, that if you think about morality, ethics, in the ways we've been doing it previously in this class, when you come to these difficult questions about rights, I think you're prepared in ways to start answering them. Again, are these positive, are these negative, general or special, whatever. I think all these things you can start to formulate how you want to answer them. Because again, it'll hinge on a lot of what you think about constraints, goodness of outcomes, and all the rest. And though, hey, that's probably a project for the rest of your life. It's not something you have to solve right now. It's something, the rest of your life to think about this. And it's important to think about these things, I think. Okay, that's getting a little deep there. And when things get deep, that's when Professor Ray likes to lean back and relax, remove some arm flab. Pat yourself on the back. Come on, pat yourself on the back. Because that's another module you're almost finished with. So take the module quiz, do some tweeting, and then when you are thirsty for more, come on back. But until then, hey, take care. Stay safe.